All right, today we're going to trace the incredible journey of energy. We're going to follow it from a star, 93 million miles away, and see how it flows through plants, animals, and the very ground we walk on. This is the story of what powers the entire engine of life on Earth.
So, let's just jump right in with a big question. Think about it for a second. You look at a massive forest, just teeming with life, but what's fueling all of it? Well, the answer starts with the sun, and it's a one-way trip for energy. We're going to follow that journey, step by step.
But before we can follow the energy, we kind of have to understand the stage where this whole drama plays out. So, first things first. Section 1, what exactly is an ecosystem?
Okay, so at its core, an ecosystem is all about interactions. Just think of it like a community, where all the living things, the plants, animals, microbes, all that stuff are in this constant dance with the non-living things, like the water, the soil, and of course, the sunlight.
And these systems, they come in all shapes and sizes, but we can basically split them into two major groups. You've got your land-based ones, which we call terrestrial, so forests, deserts, you get the idea. And then you have the aquatic ones, which can be anything from a tiny little pond to the massive, sprawling ocean. Now, to make this all super easy to grasp, we're going to zoom way in on one of the simplest examples out there, a small pond. It's like a perfect, self-contained little world that shows us all the basic rules of how life and energy work together.
So we have our little pond. Now let's talk about the power source. That brings us to Section 2, capturing the sun's energy. This is literally where it all begins.
Now here's what I find absolutely wild. The sun is just blasting our planet with energy, right? But it turns out less than half of that sunlight is even the right type for plants to use for photosynthesis. And of that usable slice, plants only manage to grab a teeny tiny 2 to 10%. And get this, that minuscule fraction is what runs the entire living world. It's kind of mind-blowing.
And this whole process, this magic trick of turning sunlight into actual living stuff, or biomass, it has a name. We call it primary production. It's the absolute foundation, the moment where energy from a star gets turned into chemical energy that, other things can actually eat.
So how much stuff are we really talking about? Well, every single year, all the producers on Earth create about 170 billion tons of this organic matter, and that's dry weight. It is just a staggering amount of life being built from nothing more than sunlight, air, and water. But here's a little twist for you. You'd probably think that the oceans, since they cover over 70% of the planet, would be doing most of this work, right? But nope. Take a look. Land-based ecosystems actually crank out about 2/3 of all that primary production. Turns out the oceans are incredibly vast, but a lot of that space is basically a biological desert.
Okay, so we've captured the sun's energy. We've stored it in plants. So what happens next? Well, that brings us to Section 3, the flow of food. Or to put it simply, who eats whom.
Scientists like to organize this flow using something called trophic levels, which is really just a fancy way of saying feeding levels. It's pretty simple. At the very bottom, you've got your producers, the plants. They get eaten by herbivores, the primary consumers. And they, in turn, get eaten by carnivores, the secondary and tertiary consumers. It's like a ladder of energy transfer.
So here is the most important rule to remember. Energy does not get recycled. It's a one-way street. It flows from the sun, gets captured by the producers, and then it just keeps moving up the food chain from one consumer to the next.
But here's the catch, and it is a huge one. Every time energy moves up a step on that ladder, most of it gets lost. This is called the 10% law. As a general rule, only about 10% of the energy from one level actually makes it into the bodies of the next level up.
Well, that brings up a pretty obvious question, doesn't it? If a cow eats a bunch of grass but only gets 10% of its energy, what in the world happened to the other 90%? Well, most of it's just lost as heat. It gets burned up just keeping the animal alive, moving around, breathing, staying warm. And this fact has massive implications for how an ecosystem is structured.
Okay, so we've established that energy flows in one direction and is lost. But what about the actual stuff? The leaves, the wood, the bodies of animals? That brings us to Section 4, nature's recycling system, a process we call decomposition.
So this whole breakdown process happens in about 5 key stages. First, little critters like earthworms tear the dead material into smaller bits. Then, water washes out some of the soluble nutrients. After that, bacteria and fungi really go to town, using enzymes to break it down chemically. This creates a rich, dark stuff called humus, which finally gets mineralized, releasing all those raw nutrients right back into the soil for plants to use all over again.
And this shot right here, it just illustrates that cycle perfectly. A leaf falls from a tree. Decomposers, like this fungus and these earthworms, get to work breaking it all down, turning it back into that rich soil that's going to fuel new growth on that very same tree. So you see, the matter gets recycled, but the energy just flows through.
Okay, so we've seen how energy moves and how matter gets recycled, but what does this structure actually look like? How can we visualize it? Well, that leads us to our final section, the shape of energy. The way we do it is with something called an ecological pyramid. It's a really simple but powerful way to diagram the relationships between all those feeding levels. And you can build a pyramid based on a few different things: the sheer number of organisms, their total weight or biomass, or, and this is the most accurate one, the amount of energy they hold. Now, in almost any ecosystem you can think of, whether it's a forest or a grassland, the pyramid stands upright. It makes perfect sense, right? You need a huge mass of producers at the bottom to support a smaller mass of herbivores, which then supports an even tinier mass of carnivores at the top. But, and this is so cool, there's a major exception. In the ocean, that pyramid of biomass can actually be flipped upside down. You can literally have a situation where the total weight of all the fish is greater than the total weight of the producers they're eating. I know, how on earth is that possible? It feels like it breaks all the rules we just talked about. Well, the secret is all about speed. The producers in the ocean are these tiny little things called phytoplankton, and they reproduce incredibly fast. They get eaten almost as quickly as they grow, so if you measure them at any one moment, their total mass is small. But over time, their crazy fast production can support a much larger mass of fish that grow a lot more slowly.
And that really brings us to a final thought. We like to put all these organisms into neat little boxes and levels, but nature is way messier than that. A sparrow, for example, is a primary consumer when it eats seeds, but it's a secondary consumer when it eats an insect. So think about your own day. When you eat a salad, you're a primary consumer. You eat some chicken, you're a secondary consumer. So the question is, how many different trophic levels do you operate on every single day? It's definitely something to chew on. Thanks for joining us.